to the Cumbria Business Growth Hub podcast. I'm joined today by Claire Louise Chapman, who is Managing Director of the Shared Value business. Today, we're going to be discussing the topic of social value and the benefits of embedding social value into your business strategy. Welcome to the podcast, Claire Louise.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Can you start off by just introducing yourself and tell us about the mission of your company, the Shared Value business?
Yeah, so I'm Claire Louise and I am a social sustainability professional. And the Shared Value business is a social value consultancy. So what that means is we specialise in helping organisations understand the methodology that the UK government is using to buy social sustainability within contracting. So I will explain in a bit more detail what that actually means, because I understand that sounds quite a bit complex. But essentially, yeah, we're quite specialist and we work in public sector supply chain and we help companies understand those questions in a work-winning environment to help win work, basically. So we do a lot of strategy, we do bid development, we do a lot of training and help with delivery where people want us to crack on with getting on with it.
How did you get involved in social value and how did you kind of become passionate about this subject?
Well, I've got a slightly eclectic background. I've worked in regeneration, started in marketing a long time ago, and worked in the charity sector for quite a long time. And I also was employed as a corporate responsibility manager for a big energy company. So when I decided to set up the company, I thought I would really like to go and do what I was doing in that CSR world and move back into that area with the experience that I have in terms of regeneration, public sector, understanding how charities work. And what I was really passionate about is helping commercial organisations develop partnerships with charitable organisations, recognising the knowledge and expertise that both side brings to the party. And we'll get into that as we're talking, but understanding that different types of organisations bring a different skill set, which ultimately benefits local people and places. And we all care about that as human beings. And this is kind of what's been integrated into public sector contracting, that it's called community wealth. It's about the vibrancy and economic stability of local places to create places where people want to live and work and raise children. And how we do that by thinking about more than just the money within contracts, if that makes sense. Slightly complicated, but not really as a principle. The principle is, as people, we all care about things. As companies, companies are staffed by people who care about things. Companies therefore care about things. How can we take those values and use those values to deliver positive impact through the way that our businesses behave as well? And I'm really passionate about that. So that's what I specialize in, helping people understand the systems and processes to help that happen, really.
That's really interesting. And yeah, we'll delve more into that as the podcast goes on. But before we do, perhaps it's useful just to talk about some definitions first. You mentioned corporate social responsibility there. What exactly is social value and how does it differ from things like corporate social responsibility?
Yeah, and some of the complexity around this is just because we've got so many definitions and people using terms and there's real shades of grey in terms of that definition. So I tend to work on, if we think about sustainability as being that kind of three-legged stool: economy, environment, and society. So what we're talking about is we're talking about the society pillar, and that's the people pillar. Okay, so if we're thinking about sustainability strategy, we can call it, sometimes it's called ESG strategy, but it's that social piece. And so corporate responsibility is traditionally how we've thought about the people pillar. And so I kind of explain it as, if we think about CSR, corporate social responsibility, as being your business does well. Yeah, your business is doing well. And you want to be part of the local community. You know, your staff live locally, you live locally, you care about where you live. And so CSR tends to be monetary donation. It tends to be my business is doing well and I'm in a position where I can donate and I can do things for my local community. It tends to be sponsoring things like, football kit is the example that people use a lot. But it's not embedded into your business behaviors. It's an add-on. Your business does well, you have some money, you give it away. It's not fundamental to the way that you behave as a business, right? Social value is quite new. It's based on an act of parliament that came through about 10 years ago. But social value is the operational behaviors that you take as a company. So social value is a lot less fluffy than people think it is. It's actually about jobs and skills and the way that you spend your money and local community. And there's environmental that's been kind of thrown in there because we live, essentially we're living with climate change. We're in a climate crisis. We can't forget that element. So if we think about jobs and skills and spend, they are all operational behaviors of a company. It's the way that we employ people. It's the way that we progress people. It's the decisions that we make about our supply chain development and our spend. So that's what social value is. And CSR is still an important part of social value because we mustn't stop doing that good stuff for community engagement, but we're much more thinking about integrated behaviors. Can we volunteer our time? Have we got resource that we can gift? Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah. So am I right in saying that kind of social value is embedded more across the organization, and organizations are thinking about putting people first, kind of whatever they're doing, whether that's supply chain, hiring. Would that be right in saying?
Yeah. So if we think about the jobs element, we're talking about local jobs. So if we think about Cumbria, right, Cumbria is a big county, more sheep than people, probably. And we're losing our young people. So we've got an aging demographic. So what can we do as organisations to be attracting young people into our organisations? Making sure that our organisations are representative of our local communities as well. So I work a lot in engineering sectors and it's very male dominated. And there's absolutely no reason why it should be male dominated because pretty much we've got a 50-50 split male females on the planet. So, let's have a think about that increased representation. And there's lots of business benefits to that because you're attracting, top talent. So it's that jobs piece, the skills piece is looking at how are we developing our staff? How are we making sure that we're giving everybody the opportunity to really shine in our organisations and making the most of that talent? The spend is about how do we spend locally? How do we spend inclusively? How do we make sure that the money that we spend as organisations to the best of our ability stays in that local environment? Because the more that we can get money going round locally, so if we all go home and spend our wage on Amazon, no offense to Amazon, this concept called leakage, it's going, we've spent it on the internet, whereas if you go down to the high street and you spend it with locally owned businesses, that's benefiting local people, local employees. So it's these kind of concepts. So you can see they're very kind of socioeconomic. It's not just about giving money away. We do that as well for charities because that's such an important thing for us to do as organizations.
Yeah, so it's kind of about, politicians talk about growth a lot, and kind of growth is what we need to improve the living standards of everyone in the country. Am I right in saying that social value is sort of goes alongside growth in ensuring that growth is sustainable and kind of is beneficial to whole communities?
It is if we think about the spend, there is the government, there's a driver for spending money with small businesses. So, and social value really picks up on that because, the government has recognised that it's really important that we spend money with small businesses because they will then, they will support it in the right way. They will then grow and they will become big businesses. And we're supporting this constant cycle of regeneration, economic regeneration, really within businesses and supporting business growth. So, and, the reality is that the principles that sit behind this are around creating an equal society. We've got some massive societal challenges, and the reality is so anybody who's been on my training will know I use the example of food banks. Okay, so food poverty. So food poverty is caused by poverty. It's, people not earning enough money to be able to pay the bills. Okay, so lots of organizations donate to food banks, and that's absolutely fundamental. And that's a CSR activity. That's an altruistic gesture that an organization makes to donate to food banks. And it's absolutely fundamental because we know that families with children are disproportionately affected by food poverty. So we know that regularly there are adults that skip meals in order to be able to feed their children. And it's something that needs to be addressed now. If a child is hungry now, then we donate to a food bank now to stop that child being hungry. But if you think about it, donating to a food bank isn't tackling the causality of that situation happening. Okay, what will tackle the causality of that situation happening is employing at least one adult in that household in full-time hours, earning a decent wage in that. So it's basically what they earn per hour and having enough hours to actually earn a wage. And that's as decent hours and decent wage employers. That's an operational decision for a company. Okay, so if we think about this in a strategic way from a social value strategy, we would say we will ensure as an organisation that all of our employees earn enough while they work for us and have access to enough hours, the hours that they need to work. And that's our strategy to address poverty and food poverty. We will also, as our CSR strategy, donate to a food bank. So we're tackling the immediate need of food poverty. So that is a typical social value strategy for an organisation. And we've sat and we've thought about it and we've understood the causality of the situation, and we are playing our part to try and tackle that.
Wow. Yeah. So it's about businesses understanding the impact of what they do kind of beyond their operations.
It is, and it's that socioeconomic piece, and I
Mm,
suppose what I do is I help organisations understand the socioeconomic context and talk about what is relevant and proportionate for an organisation to be able to do, because we
mm,
can't save the world alone. Yes, and there are things that are more relevant for you as an organisation. So, just as an example, so there's a great company who's contract cleaning company, and they have cherry pickers. So what they do is every year they go and help put Christmas lights up for the local hospital. Okay, so it's not a big thing for that company. It is a big thing because it's a couple of days with the staff and there's a cost to the company. But otherwise, the hospital would have to pay for that specialist
mhm.
service. So that's CSR because it's utilizing the special expertise and resource and asset that company has. Not everybody could provide that service. So the company sat and thought, what could we do that would be really helpful to support the community, to support the hospital? It supports a fundraising program. So that's just a little example of that, just sitting and thinking and going, what is it that we could do that nobody else could do? And who would
Sure.
find value in that? Because that's
Yeah.
really powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. I just had my Christmas tree picked up by a local charity that we paid to do it. It was picked up by a local company, so they must be donating their time,
Quite
I presume.
possibly, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
thinking about, yeah, exactly. What is it that I could do to help? So that's from that community that, when I said job skills spend community, that's
Yeah.
that's about being integrated into your community, recognizing the skills that you can bring for that community that are not just about writing a check to somebody. It's like, we'd love to make a donation, but how else can we help you through our subject matter expertise, our skills, the assets that we've got. So
So thinking about kind of the benefits to a business of embedding social value into its strategy, you talked about kind of contracts and winning contracts and things like that. Can you just give a sort of overview of the ways in which this can sort of help advance an organization?
yes, so most of my clients come to me because they have a tender in front of them. So if people are not familiar with tenders, that's the way that the public sector basically procures goods and services. So it's a structured process. And what the new procurement legislation says is that public sector, central government departments must ask a question about social value. So they must ask a question which has an evaluation scoring of a minimum 10%. So 10% of the scoring on that tender will be how well you answer a question on, in delivery of this contract. If you win this contract, what social good will you create through delivery of this contract? So being mindful, we're talking jobs, skills, spend, community, and there's an environmental bit there. Okay. So this is where most of my clients come from. They've got a tender in front of them and they're just not quite sure how to answer that question because it's pretty new. And so this is why it's important that people understand this, because people might be listening to this. I mean, I presume that people will probably be listening to this because they're thinking about working in public sector, or they're already working in public sector and they're possibly in that situation where they've got something in front of them and going, I'm not quite sure of this. So it is important that people understand this because it's linked to winning work. It's important outside of that. It's important as businesses that we understand this. I would say that because I'm passionate about it. So what happened in terms of that public sector procurement piece is there was a piece of procurement legislation that came about 4 or 5 years ago, and it said about this explicit evaluation. So local authorities are not liable for that piece of legislation. So you've got central government departments are in scope, as we call it, of that procurement note. But what's happening is that other public sector, like local authorities, are saying this principle is great. We should be, we might not have to do it, but we will do it because in principle, this is a great thing that all of our supply chain, all of us as organizations consider how we can create a positive society, positive action to tackle disadvantage within society, things like child poverty. So what we're seeing is that if you're going directly for a public contract, you will probably see it. But also the really big public sector supply chains are saying to the tier ones, so the companies, the private companies, the commercial organizations that sit at the head of that supply chain. And when what's happening is commissioners are saying, how are you disseminating social value through your supply chain? So it means that even if you're not doing business directly with a public sector organisation, you may well start to see social value questions coming through because the big private organisations, commercial organisations are now asking those questions. And there's a piece of work that I'm doing at the moment with a large organisation. So we're looking at how to start asking those questions as simply and relevantly and appropriately as possible for smaller organizations that are coming through that supply chain. So this stuff is more relevant for people than they might originally appreciate.
I don't know, this might be a difficult question to answer, but what would be expected of a sort of SME when answering a question like that? Are they looking for amount of money donated or, projects, social value projects that they're involved in? How would that work?
Okay, so the way that it works is you should not be being asked for a donation within social value because that's corporate social responsibility. And we'll not get into the ins and outs of that because sometimes we are seeing it, but theoretically, it shouldn't be about monetary contribution. Personally, I don't think there's a place for that in a tender environment because you could be perceived as buying your way into a contract. Yeah. So what the questions should be asking is things like, if you win this contract, will you be creating jobs? How can you reassure us that you'll try and make those jobs local, or you'll create early talent opportunities? So how many trainees might you take on? Okay, so if you win this work, is there an opportunity for you to take an apprentice on? And again, I use apprentice hesitantly because for small organizations, it's a very big commitment is taking on an apprentice. And this is where your social value needs to be what we call relevant and proportionate to the size, type, duration of the contract that you're going for. So personally, I think it's more about we'll take trainees on, we'll offer work experience placements, we'll offer an opportunity for a T-level student. So T-levels are like the opposite of apprenticeships. Apprentices tend to be in work 4 days a week and at college 1 day a week. T-levels, you're at college 4 days a week and you're in the office 1 day a week. It's much more accessible for a small organisation to make that kind of commitment. So, your spend might be around, are you spending with local organisations? Probably a less relevant question for SMEs. But yes, it's that jobs and skills, and then there's the community piece. How are you engaging with community? What good stuff? Like the example with the cherry picker that I gave. Give us an example of the kind of things. Can you go in and do schools education work? So in Cumbria, we have an amazing organisation called Inspira. And Inspira coordinates you being able to go and give time to go and do careers talks about your subject matter expertise and skill set into schools, 14 to 16-year-olds. We've got a really vibrant charitable sector, VCSE sector, that does lots of that kind of thing that organisations can engage with. So lots of opportunities. To some extent, it's just having that time to sit back and think about it. But this is where small organizations can absolutely nail social value. So there's been, in my world, there's lots of discussions about people saying, oh, SMEs are disadvantaged in social value because they're small and they can't do stuff. My response to that is the barrier for SMEs is not your ability to deliver stuff. It's your ability to understand what's being asked for. So big organizations, they're all getting social value managers who theoretically should know this stuff. Yeah, if you're a small organization, how on earth are you supposed to know about this stuff, really? It's like everything. As a social, as a manager, I've been there, I've got that t-shirt. You've got to be a jack of all trades. You've got to be good at everything, health and safety, HR, and now they're throwing this at you. I think if nothing else from this podcast, please be reassured that if you're listening to this as a small organization, you can be great at this. You are agile, you can make decisions quickly. All your staff are probably local. You will know, you'll have kids in the local school. It's just basically about understanding what we're meaning by job, skills, spend, community, and the environmental aspects. And once you understand that, you've nailed it, basically. And then the other thing to remember, just as a tip, is it's contract specific. If we're talking about doing this in a procurement tendering environment, the commitments that you are making are relevant to the contract that you're going for. And people forget about this. What you do is you write a lovely spiel about how wonderful you already are, and your evaluator will go, yeah, but you've not told me specifically what you're going to do if you win this contract. So your social value response is measurable. Yeah, it's specifically, if we win this piece of work, we will do this for these people in this time scale, and that's the measurable on it. So you can measure us. I can give you a report at the end of the year and I can say we've done X number of hours going into the school with this, this school, this is what the students said about it. Again, it's not rocket science, it's just thinking about it in a structured way. And you don't have to promise the earth as well, because it's about what's relevant and proportionate and deliverable. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So just while you mentioned about being specific when you're answering your questions and having measurable goals, what other sort of tips would you give to small businesses that are just starting out in social value?
I would say if you have a little bit of time just to sit back and reflect, and the more questions you see through tenders, the better, really, because you start to understand the kind of things that you're being asked. Do you know what I do for the chamber? I do training on tendering. So what we do, if anybody's been on it, we work through the procurement portals. So we get everybody registered on the procurement portals. And then what we tend to do is I'd say to people, throw me a topic, and then we look it up and we play around on Proactis, and because you can do searches, so you can register on the procurement portal. And this is a recommendation, and I know it's a pain, but it doesn't take very long to register on a procurement portal. So if you look up the Chest or Proactis, that's quite a good one. You register, it'll take you about 5 minutes, 10 minutes to put your details in there. And then you can start do searches. So just search on your topic area, right? And you might find an opportunity in Bath. It's unlikely that we're going to go for something in Bath, but what you'll start to see is that you get all the documentation. So you can scroll through and you can say, what are they asking for social value? Or you do something locally, look for something local. You're not necessarily thinking of going for it, but it'll give you an idea of what those questions are. And you just start to build up your knowledge. And then you can spend 5 minutes going, how would I answer that? And if you're going, I have absolutely no idea, then maybe you're kind of identifying, I just need to do a bit of like more research into this, or talk to people like me, talk to the chamber. I do training regularly, but it's building that confidence in the subject matter, really.
And you must kind of sort of build a stock of answers over time that you can, it gets easier and easier with each
Yes,
one you
well, it's
do.
like anything. It's like anything, isn't it? The more
Yeah.
you do of something, the more confident that you get at something. And yes, you can build your resource but recognize that, because I get asked this all the time by clients, can you just develop us some stock answers? And it's like, no, what we can look at is we can look at themes and that's relevant for your organization. So let's talk about jobs in your organization. What's your skill set? What kind of jobs are you creating? Can you localize those jobs? What opportunities for early talent? And I say early talent, not necessarily young talent, because we need to remember about career changers, older workforce, thinking about it in this kind of wider picture about how can we attract talent, whatever that talent looks like, into our organization, and you start to map, and it's strategic as well for your company. It might be, if you're tiny, if you're a micro organization, it's a really simple strategy, isn't it? Yeah, but it's still having mindfully sat down and thought about something. And if you've got that, then when you get a question in, you can just go back to that document and go, oh, we've thought about skills. Yeah, actually, yes, I could take that trainee, and I know that I could talk to that college about it because we've done that in the past. And and it becomes an action that you will take. And you can say, we did this last year. And that's your reassurance for an evaluator that you can deliver what you say you're going to deliver. We did this before and we will do this. And it's just remembering, as I said, that you've got to have a we will do, but you can use your previous delivery experience as an example of good practice. So,
Sure. Yeah, that's really helpful. Just one final question before we wrap up, Claire Louise. Can you give us a sort of idea of how you see social value evolving over the next 10 years?
mm, I don't think it's going anywhere. You always wonder whether these things are flash in the pan, but it's been around for about 5 years now in its form, as in per that methodology and the procurement legislation. So we've obviously got a new government, and we've got some new procurement legislation that's coming through at the moment that's due to be launched. They've said, I think, April. And looking at the writing on the wall on that one, it's all about jobs and skills and small business spend. So everything that we've just talked about. And I think that for chamber members, those SMEs and micro businesses within the chamber membership, this is really positive stuff. I would see, don't be scared of social value. It may be unfamiliar. Unfamiliar things are daunting, but once you have got the basics and you've got to grips with it, don't worry about it, and actually see it as a massively positive thing, because big organizations are being told that they need to do business with small organizations. And so for our SME sector, that is only a good thing. It's great. And about having that visibility and putting yourself out there, that in order to do business. And I work with a lot of very big businesses, and I know that they are looking actively to do business with smaller enterprises. So get yourselves out there to those networks, get that profile out there. I know it's always resource and it's difficult as a small business taking time out of the business, but in the social value world, it's feeling pretty positive for small businesses, to be honest. So, I would end on that positive note, really. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I'll just finish by saying the listeners should keep an eye on our Cumbria Business Growth Hub website. for when we do our next training with Claire Louise on social value. And you can also sign up to our newsletter there to receive training and supply chain updates as well. But finally, just the last thing is just say thanks very much, Claire Louise, for joining us today. It's been really useful.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, and good luck to
Thanks.
everybody.
Yes, good luck. Bye bye.
Bye.